Praise God. I remember when I was a boy and went through a really rough season in my life of going through a divorce of my parents and seeing, just all types of different things happening. And I just remember I had a grandma who was a Christian, and she would always tell me about Jesus, and she would always, try to bring me to church and stuff. And I just remember asking myself a question, and I believe most people in their life ask this. You watching, you've probably asked this tons of times, and it's this question of where was God when this happened? Where was God when my father died? Or where was God when my brother passed? Or where was God when this happened to my sister? Or this happened to my cousin? Or where was God? And I just feel like it's so important to answer this question of where was God in these moments and why did these things happen? Because a lot of times people never accept Jesus because of a situation that took place that was never really his fault to begin with. And I remember when I got older and I accepted Christ after being an atheist, I completely did not believe in God, and I encountered him when I was 16 years old. And in that moment, I just remember getting this unction in my heart and this feeling of okay, it's time that I ask God the hard question, It's time I ask him, where were you when this happened? Where were you when this happened with my dad? And I want to just read you real quick a passage from the book of Proverbs. And it's a short passage, but it's so powerful. And this is what I love about the Word of God in the Bible is it could be the most shortest passage or one sentence, but the power that the Word of God carries, because this book was inspired by God, the power it carries is unmatchable. And so what I want to read you is Proverbs 3:5. And this is what it says: trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Okay? Go to the next verse here. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight. So it says to lean not on your own understanding, right? And I think a lot of times as we go through things, the natural tendency for us to do is we want to analyze it, we want to figure it out, and then we want to come up with a solution of why it's happened. I was in a school one year and I was preaching, and this young man gets saved and he accepts Jesus. And I remember he was loving God. I mean, complete turnaround, just started loving people, started going to church. It was amazing. This guy went from just not knowing Christ, being not maybe the happiest guy on campus, to a complete change. Well, the winter break came, and he comes up to me after winter break and he says, "You're telling me God is real?" And I'm kind of like, "Yeah, man, you've encountered him." And he goes, "If God was real, then why was my father murdered last week?" And my heart drops when he says this, because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of this young man of what it must feel like that his father was murdered the week before, and he has a very valid question of, if God was real, why would that happen? And I remember looking at this young man, and I didn't have an answer for him. I wasn't going to sit there and try to flip through my Bible and give him 10 verses. I just simply looked at him and said, "Hey man, I love you." And I hugged him, and he began to weep, and I just in that moment just was there for him, and I heard him out. And I remember a couple years later, he had came in communication with me, and he said this. He says, "Because you didn't try to shove religion and give explanation, and you simply stood there and loved me, I still follow Jesus today." The question of where was God, that's what I want to hit on. It's not where was he, it's do you really see how he was in your situation in that moment? There's an analogy that I want to give you of this barber. So there's this barber in this shop, and he's there, and he's cutting this guy's hair, and the guy in the chair is a Christian, and the barber is not. The barber's an atheist, and the barber's cutting his hair, and he's lining him up, and he's doing a real good job, and they're talking about everything. They're talking about politics, they're talking about family, and all of a sudden the subject of religion gets brought up. And the barber looks at the guy and he's like, "Man, I don't believe in God." He's like, "God don't exist. He's not real." And the guy, being smart, I mean, the guy's cutting his hair, he kind of casually asks him, well, why? Why don't you believe in God? And the barber says, if God was real, there would be no pain in the earth. There'd be no brokenness, there would be no murders, there'd be no heartache, there'd be no tears. If God was real, none of this would happen. Where was God in all that? He doesn't exist. So the guy, the Christian, sits down in his chair, he's getting his hair cut, and he says, all right, man, have a good day, pays the guy, gives him a tip, and he walks out. So all of a sudden, the Christian's walking down the street, he can't get that question and that response that atheist spoke to him out of his mind. And he's walking down the street, and all of a sudden he starts noticing that there's homeless people on the street with dirty, oily, dingy, stinky, greasy hair that they haven't washed, they haven't cut in years. So he quickly turns around and he goes back into the barber shop and he says, hey, barbers don't exist. And the guy goes, what do you mean barbers don't exist? I just cut your hair. I'm right here. And he goes, no, barbers don't exist because if barbers existed, there would be no one in the world with dirty, stinky, mangy, gross hair. Everybody's hair would be cut. And the barber says, I do exist. It's just people don't come to me. And the Christian in that moment looks at him and says, exactly. See, Proverbs speaks of not having understanding. It says this, trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding, right? In these moments of hard times, we really can't understand what's going on. And most of the time, the things that we go with, I want to just tell you, are not God's fault. And I feel like we've put so much of the blame on Him, like God gives mankind something called free will. Where as a person, I freely have to choose to do what's right. And it's not fair for me to blame you or for you to blame him or for her to blame her for something that we did to each other, blaming God for it. It's just not right. God gives us free will. He gives His people free choice. And that's why it's so important that we live this Bible and we walk it out and we walk in love. God bless you guys.
I can hear the footsteps of my King. I can hear His heartbeat beckoning. In my darkness, He has set me free.